Here is Microsoft's description of the data tools. Quote, SQL Server Data Tools, SSDT, transforms database development by introducing a ubiquitous declarative model that spans all the phases of database development and maintenance update inside Visual Studio. You can use SSDT T-SQL design capabilities to build, debug, maintain, and refactor databases, whether working with a database project or directly with a connected database instance located on or off-premise. End quote. All right, so every word of that description is true, but it certainly isn't a good 60-second elevator talk about what data tools are. What the data tools really do is to put database development into the context of writing software in Visual Studio in every sense. DBAs are probably going to want to stick to Management Studio for their daily work with databases and SQL servers. But developers, particularly seasoned Visual Studio developers, will be able to completely live in the data tools. Well, except maybe when you put on your DBA hat for smaller clients that don't have full-time DBAs. I've done that a lot in my consulting career. The crux of the matter is that for simple admin tasks, you can use the new dedicated SQL Server Object Explorer in the data tools and do most of what you need to do from a developer's perspective instead of using Management Studio. And when you create a new database project, you can act as though it were a new software project, which is a really nifty abstraction from one context to another. The best part of data tools is that if you have experience with Visual Studio, you'll feel right at home with the data tools. They have support for code navigation, IntelliSense, language support for T-SQL that's similar to what you get for C# and Visual Basic. There's platform-specific validation of your code, debugging and declarative editing in the T-SQL editor, and lots more coding-focused features. You can save database object definitions and source control. And when you're ready to deploy the database, you can publish the project like you do for a website to any version of SQL Server from 2005 on, and including SQL Azure. Another use of the data tools is as a replacement for the Business Intelligence Development Studio, or BIDS, of earlier versions of SQL Server. BIDS was built using Visual Studio 2008, so quite an old version of Visual Studio now, and provided templates for creating various business intelligence projects. Data Tools completely replaces BIDS and provides a much better development environment than BIDS ever did. So Microsoft clearly learned its lessons from BIDS. The system requirements for data tools are the same as for current versions of Visual Studio. So if you have Visual Studio installed, you're good to go. Data Tools doesn't require a prior installation of Visual Studio though. If you don't have Visual Studio installed, installing the Data Tools will automatically install the Visual Studio integrated shell, apply the latest service packs, if there are any, and install the data tool components. The integrated shell will only contain the data tools themselves and doesn't include Visual Studio programming languages and the features that support their respective project systems. But if you do have Visual Studio installed, then Data Tools integrates into that installation, and you'll find that Visual Studio has new features and project templates. Now, when you install Data Tools as part of SQL Server, and you don't have Visual Studio installed, you won't actually end up with the data tools fully installed. It's kind of weird. Instead, you'll have the Visual Studio shell installed with a project in the SQL Server node of templates with what's called a SQL Server Data Tools web install item. When you create a project using that template, it'll download and install the actual tools. It's kind of a funky way of doing things and potentially very confusing. First time I saw that, I didn't really know what was going on. But I'm sure Microsoft had a great reason for doing it that way. I'm sure. Now, there are two ways that you can use the data tools once you have them installed: connected and disconnected. You might call the connected development Management Studio mode. So that's kind of how I think of it. In this mode, you'll need to have a live connection to the database server, local or remote. It can be on the local machine or on some machine across the network. And changes take effect in the database immediately. So you have to be a little bit careful. There's almost never any kind of undo feature. So this mode works with any database server, including SQL Azure. And by the way, you may notice a recurring theme with data tools. A major motivation for Microsoft to create the data tools was driven in part by the need to develop database projects for Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud service for hosting applications and databases and just about anything that you might want to. But the tools are helpful for your own instances of SQL Server itself, that is the data tools. Okay, then Microsoft calls the disconnected mode of development, quote, project-oriented offline database development. Just quite a mouthful, kind of an intimidating title. But I call this the software approach to database development. This mode is, in fact, offline development in the sense that you don't have to have a connection to a SQL Server instance to create databases and objects or to update them. So you can hop on a plane that doesn't have Wi-Fi and you can work on your database project in this mode. Then, when you're ready to deploy your database or to make changes, Data Tools has a slew of tools for updating the database, comparing schemas and data, and perform other functions to let you work offline. So it really is a cool mode, and it's nice that you have the option of going either connected or disconnected.